Okay, go ahead and so I love that picture. I mean, fall colors are gonna be here pretty soon, and actually that looks like a pretty clean landscape picture here in Plymouth. That's where the picture was taken. Nice trees on the street front that is in the public area, and then some nice plants skipping back in, giving it some color.
The library is now closed.
So my thought is most of us get used to the landscape we have, and we just don't take time to observe it. You walk around and really look at your plant health, think about any changes you want to make. Are you really getting enjoyment out of it? Next slide. So take a moment, just think about your landscape. Do you have your favorite place to relax, a place for children or grandchildren to play? Do you have a private area where you can go to outside and just unwind and not be interrupted? You have some favorite landscape plants you have in your landscape? Do you have a specimen tree that you're proud of? Or is it, I've got a picture of one that I wouldn't be proud of, a slippery elm here in Plymouth. So it's kind of a dirty tree, and you'll see some issues with softer wooded trees like that. And do you like to grow fruit or produce? And you're willing to do that maintenance that goes with doing that, because that's a time consuming activity. So one program I've done before, and I just called it a low maintenance landscape. And it's basically just keeping your landscape attractive and simple, and versus complicating things and knowing your plants to plant them where they'll grow healthy. I'll talk about that later. Next slide. So I thought I'd go over some rules of thumb for like public space. So the public space is what is your front door into your property. So you should keep it relatively simple. So it's inviting and not distracting and blends in with your community that you're living in. You don't want to be the person everyone's talking about on the block. The landscape should be inviting to the general public. So it looks welcoming to come up to your front door. And you should keep your sidewalks and driveways open. And that's knowing where to plant plants so that they're not going to be growing into that space. And that's one of the keys to having a lower maintenance productive landscape long-term, is understanding that. Next slide. So comments. I don't want this to be boring Bob talk for an hour and a half. Is that, you find that one busy? Huh? No. And you can see that it's open going to the front door, so you don't have to worry about a boogeyman hiding anywhere, jumping out at you. I've seen landscape designs like that. Our universities are working hard to get rid of those areas just to make it a safe environment to live in. So they purposely landscape to where there's no areas where people can hide behind and stuff like that. Okay, next one. So some properties you have multiple front public spaces. That's because you're on the corner block. So both sides of your house is open and visible. So you have landscape that you have to do. And our tendency in most landscapes is we plant plants, and sometimes they can get a little large for the area. So one rule of thumb is we have windows to look out of, right? So our landscape shouldn't be blocking our windows of our homes. Some landscapes, we want to think about hiding the base of the house because it's not attractive. That's how the house was built. So some boring landscapes around a house is needed to just hide some features of the foundation of the house that may not want to share with the general public. Our one idea in design is you want to make it easy to mow the yard. So landscape design up by the house. And remember, you should be able to walk behind your landscape to do maintenance on your house. So we need to have our landscape bed wide enough to account for the mature size of the plant. And if the mature size is going to be as high as your house and very wide, that's not the proper plant to select, because you're always going to be fighting the size the plant wants to be. So you want to be thinking about those aspects as well. Does that make sense?
Can I say something
Yes.
about plants in front of a window? I think one of the things we should think about is when we look out our window, we might want to plant something out that way so we're not looking at a neighbor or something we don't want to see.
Mhm.
And depending on the size of the plant, it could be somewhat close to the window, considering maintenance and how it grows.
And that's fair. I mean, that could be a reason to plant a plant that's going to give you some privacy. Simple landscape. I like they're using some grasses as a different plant to use. It's not overpowering your view. It's open. I kind of just like the simplicity of this landscape. And it's something that my brother had some grasses in his landscape and he said they were getting too big. I said, well, that's a good deal for you, Steve. Divide it into three. Now you have three grass plants and replant one of them in that site. And then you got two you can give to a neighbor or to a friend. So there are some that are harder to maintain than others. So if you're putting up by your house, you want to make sure it's one that's not going to take a heavy equipment to divide down the road, because some can be problematic that way. But so nice, simple design, easy to maintain, and not overpowering the property. So this would be a good example of a simplistic landscape design for a house in the urban setting. Is this inviting?
No.
No, so we've let the plants overpower. There's no reason to put these shrubs here. If you do, should be smaller plants that aren't going to overpower that entrance to the home property.
And it looks like a maintenance issue.
It's a huge
You
maintenance.
have to look at it all the time.
So this is not a low maintenance landscape. This is one, several of these plants should be removed and replaced because just of the size and wrong placement, so not only do we have shrubs in front that's impacting the entrance to the property, but then we have a shrub up by the door, kind of make it uninviting. The boogeyman could hide in this landscape for sure. So you want to be careful with that. So ideally we want, some height, up by the door, but much smaller plant size, then go down and be more of a low planting that's got some uniformity to it. And then on the end, we want to select a plant that's going to have more size to it at the corners, traditionally, but that shrub there is something that should have been maintained at a smaller size. I mean, you always can downsize. I mean, I did that as an experiment once. We had a huge one on the 4-H grounds in southern Indiana, so I took it back to a stump. Well, yeah, in 4 years it'll look nice again, but it takes a long time, so it's almost easier to plant a new plant that is fresh. And that's what happens in some landscapes when we don't maintain the size of the plants that we have. So this one's more uniform. It's utilizing shrubs again as the focal point. We do have more height here in the end. Whether maybe because this is on what used to be a highway, maybe they do want some hidden, as you noted, maybe they don't want that window fully open. But
who wants to look at a flat top shrub? You want to pick something that's attractive to you to look at.
Correct. And people routinely, because it's a maintenance issue to them, they don't even take care of that shrub right, because old shrubs, you should be not just surface pruning, shearing. You need to be going in every now and again to regenerate and get new wood grown. So you got to be, it's properly done. You go in, you pick the biggest branches in there and open it up so you encourage new growth coming from the center on out to keep it a vibrant shrub. And you can do that with yews. The problem with evergreen, like junipers and stuff, is that they don't grow from the wood out. They grow from the tip out. So you have to tip them back. So you can't wait for 10 years to try and reduce the size because you can't on those plants. So that's something you want to maintain annually. And a properly pruned shrub shouldn't look like you've pruned it in the end.
It shouldn't look like a box or a wall.
Well, that is just maintenance. You know, this is a definition of maintenance, high maintenance. Because as soon as you get that shape, it's going to start regrowing, and you're going to have to prune it back after that. So if you're a busy person, this is not an easy landscape. There's other plants you can select to utilize in that front area. I mean, we're using perennial flowers and other items like that.
The owner there looks like a control freak.
Well, that's what they say. If they are actually little balls that they prune all the time, that is definitely because then they're going to be meticulous, constantly pruning them to keep that shape. Because when it starts growing out, yeah, it has more energy than. And then, okay, we don't do this, but everyone does. You see what's by that tree? It's a rock raised area where they're putting soil against the trunk of the tree, which can create advantageous roots to grow out of the trunk by having that moisture there. I've seen it start rot into trees, but most people get away with it for a long time. But we should let the trunk of the tree be exposed to air. I mean, if you soak in a bathtub for 24 hours, are you happy? That's what we're doing to that trunk. That's not made to be moisture area. So in essence, that'd be like us sitting in a bathtub for 24 hours. But it never gets to get out of the bathtub. And then they plant around it. So a tree, we should always see the base of the tree. We always want to see the base of the tree and the roots growing out. You know, if it looks like a utility post in the ground, chances are it may have been planted too deep when it was planted. Or demonstrate and see if this, because what people do is they go to Lowe's and they buy a plant, they go or buy a burlap tree, and they'll throw soil on top to protect the root system while it's in that state. But when you get it, you got to get back to where it actually grew and plant it at the right depth that it was growing in so that the trunk is above the soil. I've gone in subdivisions and seen that issue many a time where there's a girdling root. And then and also in that subdivision, they used rock mulch, and it actually locked into the base of some of the trees where the trees couldn't actually grow out, because as the trunk grows, it needs to grow out. That's why we want to not only not have anything covering it, we want to make sure the trunk always has room to grow out each year.
Is mulch a concern too?
Yeah, you don't want to do, you don't want anything up against that trunk. So we see in the volcano mulch too, where people just dump it around the base of the tree. I once had someone that actually took all the grass clippings after they mowed and dumped it around the base of the tree. Clippings heated up, and luckily for them, it just shocked the tree because all that heat, it stopped the water nutrient flow in the cambium layer and came close to killing the tree in that case, because they didn't stop and think of the heat that fresh grass clippings create. Luckily, it didn't totally shut down the tree and it's able to bounce back. I was happy for them because it was a really nice specimen tree in the front yard they did this to. So we stop and do these things. Why? Because the neighbor did it. We always think the neighbor's an expert. When I took my test at Purdue University, I trusted nobody. I just thought the person sitting back may be a tad dumber than me. So copying off him wasn't going to get me ahead. And we're making our landscaping decisions. We should talk to someone who has knowledge, and not assume the neighbor knows what they're doing, because they're probably doing what their parents did, who didn't know what to do either.
But mulch is a good thing over the root zone, just not next to the trunk.
Right. So you want to, you know, it can be so high away from the base of the trunk. So
then you bring it down the trunk.
Yeah, and that helps with roots that are on the surface of the soil, because if they're on the surface of the soil, the roots are where they want to be. You know, so mulch is the best solution, or to make a bed that you can plant other plants into that bed that you create that's at the surface level and nothing against the trunk of the tree. So there's things we can do like that to make it easier to mow, because people get frustrated about the roots. The trees root where they need to root. And that's why 4 inches of soil can kill a tree. If you change the grade around the tree. So if you're gonna change the grade, that's a process over years, so the roots can adjust to the new depth. Okay, why is this shrub even there? This is my question. I don't see the value of that shrub at all. Does anyone see a value in it?
Separate the driveway from kids' balls and such.
Could be. But it's a content maintenance issue because the one grows right into one of your spaces you're utilizing, which is your drive. So they have to maintain it. At least they're doing, getting the shrub pruned at the height properly. At least the light's getting to the base of the shrub because that's the next. So
It's been
that
there for 20 years. I wouldn't want to take it out. I'd look at it and say, let's chop it down a little bit. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, ripping all that out.
So that's your thought?
Yeah, well.
Does
why-
anyone like it?
Why it was there to begin with, I don't know, but I mean, I've seen houses, it's
'Cause
like,
they-
why is that, why, it's covering up, it's up to the first story, or whatever, it's covering up and.
Yeah.
It should.
I'd
should
take
leave
it out.
So it was a cute little shrub when they planted it, whoever planted it.
It's like a kid,
Yeah.
cute when they're little.
And then they didn't maintain it at a height that, because if you could step over that shrub, maybe it does give you some separation there that you may appreciate. And again, I'm not you can do anything you want in your landscapes as far as I'm concerned, but these are just principles that we're trying to follow. So I just don't see that just makes it busy to me. And
Would there be any?
we had a discussion about subdivisions this morning, and the person we were requiring to put sidewalks in the subdivision. They said, well, I don't want a sidewalk that goes to nowhere. Well, I think this shrub's going to nowhere myself. I just don't. But your comment?
Would there be any way to save that? I mean, I know once you
Yeah.
get down so far, it's woody. I mean, it's.
Well, you just do your regenerative pruning of a shrub, and that's
Okay.
simply just doing what I said you do with the yews. You're going in and taking out some of the bigger branches, encouraging new branches to grow, and then you're downsizing it in the process.
Okay.
And you got to know your shrubs. Some shrubs, you can just like a lilac, you can cut off at the ground and it'll regrow. Other shrubs, you cut off of the ground, it's dead. So you need to know your shrub. So the one thing we can do to all shrubs is regenerative pruning over a 4-year period, 3-year period, where we're ending up with all new branches after that period of time. And that's how we prune our fruit plants too, because it's the new word that's more productive. So if I have a blueberry plant, I'm taking out the larger branches once it's established every year to generate new growth. You want to do that with your shrubs too. You don't want to rely on old wood forever. Okay. I just, it's following one of our principles. We use our plantings to define our property line. So we've done that with the shrub, so it has a purpose there. Again, one common mistake that people do is they don't do the standard pruning of a shrub to where you let light get to the base of the plant. You keep the top too wide. And then over time, the lower branch, plants are just real simple. You give me energy or I get rid of you. So if you have leaves and branches on the side that has leaves in the beginning, but then you create it so it's usually shade, they go away. Just like in a tree, that's why in forests we plant trees fairly close together, so there's no lower limbs on the trees because the limbs don't grow where it's shaded. So we didn't prune these shrubs properly, so it would take some time to get them to look nice again, because we'd have to do that regenerative pruning again.
So that's how come it's just green on the top and just woody. And
Yeah.
the regenerative would say just take out some of those.
You could start taking out some of those branches if you want to keep them, because the other branches will stay alive with wood, but you need new wood growing on these shrubs. So it's the time to start regenerating the shrub if you want to keep it. It's a good time to remove it if you don't have a need for it. Well, let me take a vote. How many think this is cool and attractive? No hands?
Unattractive?
Unattractive?
I don't think it's too attractive.
It's not attractive. Maybe the deer have been eating it.
That's a possibility too.
That's what it looks like to me.
Uh,
Yeah, I just wouldn't want to go to the effort to pull it all out, even though it's not pretty, it's there and it's defining the
that's fine.
I know, that's what I'm thinking. It's like, oh my gosh, no. Once it gets to that point, that's sad, but yeah.
I think it's time to call a friend with a truck.
Yeah, yeah.
Just yank them one by one. And a chainsaw.
Yeah,
Or the Plymouth City Street Department comes and gets your file every once in a while.
That's cool.
Cobra picks up your files and stuff, but they won't help you cut it down.
And then we can see, so this shrub back here up by that house is fairly tall as well. And it's not attractive now. So what's the state of that shrub? Someone told me their lilacs got powdery mildew early this year and lost all their leaves. So it could be a disease reason why that looks so bare at this time. I doubt when I took this picture is due to we're moving into fall and it just dropped all its leaves for that reason. So my question is what's going on with that? So I'll be looking at that plant from the bottom up. When I look at a plant, I always look at the base of the plant first. It's the root health and the base of the trunk that's critical for the health of the plant. So I always look there first. Then I go up and see what else could be going on with that plant. And then we've got a maintenance issue in the back. We have, maybe it's an ash. Let's see if it's an ash tree. It could be opposite is what, see on the top, there's two branches opposite. It could be an ash tree that just hasn't come down yet. So in a landscape check up that, it's a -10. Because as they deteriorate, branches fall out of them and it's a hazard for whoever is in that backyard of that property until it comes down. That's why we at Purdue recommended that if you have an ash tree, you weren't going to treat this insect influx. Yeah.
Okay, you're talking about the health of your roots and stuff. I'm telling you, I kill everything. So I don't even know if I know when healthy rose because I kill it.
Now that we start
And
with
then
we start with studying our plants, and we're going to talk about that.
Okay, I feel really ignorant. But
Down the road, but we want to make sure we know the plant that we're buying, where it wants to be. Does it want to be in the sun or the shade?
Mhm.
A common tree we love is the dogwood, but it's a shade tree. So when we plant it out in direct sun, it tends to have more problems because it's not as healthy. So by placing a plant in its preferred habitat, it's more likely to be thrifty
Okay,
because we get more insects into dogwoods more that are out in the sun because they're under more stress and their natural defenses are not as strong. So if I put this ash tree in there and, so that was, I don't have to look at the roots on that one. If it's an ash tree and has opposite limbs, so it could likely be, it was an insect that came in as aggressive and there wasn't much we could do but treat the trees literally by drilling small holes in them and injecting insecticide into the tree to get them through this wave of emerald ash borer. But if all your plants, so we'll talk about more then. We'll talk more about that actually next week, maintaining our plants. But anything else on that property? But it is kind of open. So it has that open feel to it, right? So at least that landscape, you're not looking at a landscape that's overplanted that may feel like, you aren't, at least you don't have to go to the back of that property. It's inviting to go to the front door.
I think that, I feel like we're looking at the back of the property.
Mhm.
And so that weird little hedge actually gives a little bit of privacy for
Yeah.
someone sitting on a patio or something. So there's a benefit there.
Well, yeah, this is along Michigan Road. So it was once a highway before we built.
So we're looking at the front of the house?
Yeah,
in
this
back?
is
Okay.
the front of the house.
Okay, maybe that was a snow fence type shrub. Keep the blowing snow from
Well, that could be too.
covering the driveway.
That's a good point. There's a lot of uses why you'd want a shrub, and maybe that other shrub was for that very reason, because we get lake effect snow. And it's very frustrating on where the wind decides to pile your snow. So if you have a man-made barrier, even if it's a living plant that helps protect like that driveway from being covered with deep snow and it drops it in front, that's a very good use why they may have that shrub there is to not have, I know in my driveway, it's not bad for some areas, but some areas it's twice as deep just because of the wind manipulating it and that manipulations due to the house and the plantings around my drive.
Hmm.
So that's a very good point. Good input. First, this is kind of an open landscape. It's fairly simple. So just your first looks at it, I wouldn't get too excited about it. So maintenance looks like it needs to be done on some of the plants around the house. But they may get to that this weekend. So I'm not gonna be over critical about that. I kind of like that it's not, you know, the planting around the house is not overpowering it. It's got a nice entrance into the one private area they have, which is on this side of the house. So they have that fenced in. So they have children or visitors that can go back there and relax and enjoy themselves. So they have a nice side space that's more private. And they're reducing maintenance around their trees by dumping a load of rocks. So you can see these rocks are going up fairly high on the side of the trees. So this is not good for the trees. It's not good because that's great millipede environment to have deep rocks like that. That's what they like to go in to go get the decaying organic matter, because when you first have the rocks bed created like this, dirt will fall into it and that organic matter and leaves blowing in it will eventually fill down into those deep rocks. And that's where millipedes like to hang out, is when rocks are really deep as far as a landscape. So then these people would call me up when they get a heavy rain and the millipedes are drowning, and they come out and they go to your patio to try and get to a dry spot. And all of a sudden they say, I have thousands of millipedes, what can I do? But don't have deep rock landscapes is one solution in that case. So just thinking through. So could we have rocks around our trees? Of course, that's a unifying element in landscapes is your mulch you select, just not up against the base of the tree. And always I've seen trees actually starving to death because they're being choked by the rock landscape up against the side of the tree. Because rocks can lock together in the landscape and the tree doesn't have enough energy to push it out as it's trying to grow, and becomes like a girdling chokehold on that base of the tree. So we always want rocks not tight up against the base of our tree.
So when you have rock landscaping like that, you need to go in periodically and take the rock out and clean that dirt and stuff out of it.
Well, you just don't want it this deep. You know, you want a thinner depth. We don't want deep landscapes because of termites as well. And not only is it by the base of the tree, you don't want thick mulch. You don't want thick mulch up against the side of your house, because that would give an avenue to termites to find the side of your house if they're exploring. So mulches are used to help control weeds, and they're there to be a unifying element in our landscape. We just want to be careful not to overuse it. So there's nothing wrong with rock mulches. We just have to manage the depth of the rock mulches, because that'd be very time. But that it's the depth, of that rock mulch is what you want to maintain.
So in the lower picture, we see the foundation of the house. We see stone mulch there.
Yes.
What would be a reasonable depth? 1.5 to 2 inches?
Yeah.
And that's about it.
Yeah.
And you're looking at the trees out in the yard and you think, that looks deep.
Yes.
It looks to me like it could be that those trees have sort of a bulging root that's maybe too much anyway. It's not necessarily deep roots. You don't know really.
But I don't want that mulch on my roots. I mean, I want to see the base of that tree, and I want that rock pulled away from the base of the tree. So if that is the reason, and it's not deep rocks, I still want it pulled back away from the base of the tree for maintenance of the health of the tree.
I'm seeing some of the root flare down there.
Right, so
That are kind of above ground a little bit. It looks like.
yeah, so I would just actually let some of those, I'd have the rock in between the roots so you're not having to maintain it. But I'd let those, I wouldn't be burying my roots in my tree that need to be above ground, because then you get it real high, then you have that deep rock. And then in between the roots is where the millipedes are going to say, cool, I've got a good environment.
Yeah.
So
you
what
know,
do they do?
nothing. They hurt nothing. They're not a bad animal at all. They eat or decaying organic matter. It's just people don't like them in their living space. So when you have 150 millipedes on your patio, when you entertain guests, you call up Bob Yoder and go, "What can I do?" It's they're just reacting to the environment. That's all they're doing. They'd rather stay in that rock mulch, but you made it so, or another place where they're not getting hurt. So, yeah, so I don't mind rock mulch. That's not my negative. I don't like it just being that thick up against the tree, and I'd have to pull it back and see where why it's where it's at, you know. So I would thin it out for sure around the base of those trees. So when I'm looking at landscape, sometimes I just go, oh my, I mean, I just see potential issues. And the other issue is we need to remember these are living trees, and we should be pruning the trees as they grow. Why are these branches here? They're not growing out. I would have removed these branches when it was a smaller tree, so it wouldn't have been an issue. And been more like this trunk. This is what we want in our trees, because tight fitting branches like that, they're not as well attached as you assume they are, because when they're growing up like that, it's more bark in between the tree limb and the trunk as time goes on. And that's an area where maybe some rot could start in. So I don't like those two branches myself. And then we look here, looks like a branch came off there, and you see that opening? That's where water can set in there, and that starts right down through the trunk. And I've seen a tree by my church in southern Indiana, and is this big of diameter around, but when it went down, you know how much hardwood there was? Is about that thin. It's all rotted in the center. But then they did a practice that I hope nobody in this county learns to do, which is called topping. Down in southern Indiana, topping. I argued with homeowners in southern Indiana because they didn't think I know how to prune, because they thought topping was the right way to prune. And I'm going, you know, and then a company would come in, start topping this one neighbor's tree, and then go knocking on the doors, and before you know it, that whole neighborhood was topped.
I don't know what topping is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So I would just come here and I decide this is the height I want these trees to be. So I would just cut it like a shrub right there. They don't even all the time takes into account where regrowth is going to occur, because one homeowner had a lot of dead logs this long because of regrowth grew here. So they didn't cut them at the right spot. But then what you do then is you create a lot of new growth that's weak wood. So you turned a tree into a shrub. So from that point on, it's high maintenance to maintain, because we don't have sturdy limbs. We have a lot of thick foliage that is small limbs. And if they don't cut it the right spot, we even have to pay someone to come back to recut it to get the dead wood out that they left behind. So it's a quick way to reduce the size of the tree, because people get afraid that the limbs are getting too tall. But if it's a healthy limb, that's not the issue. I mean, the tree is made to handle that. And that's why we want to monitor pruning of our limbs as our trees are growing, so that we encourage to at least have a strong base trunk to hold up our tree.
So if you take like a younger tree and you trim off a limb, should you coat that with something?
The pruning, no, if we're doing a smaller tree and we do it, you know, it's going to regrow over that pretty quickly, because we're making a small wound and then the bark will grow over it. That's called scabbing over. That's what trees do to heal wounds.
Okay.
The problem now is if I want to take off this limb, I'm going to relieve a large
Yeah,
wound.
that's pretty big.
That's going to have to shed water until that scabbing occurs, which will take years to do. So anytime we remove a large limb, that's potentially an opening that water can get into the tree and rot can start. So this topping and creating a bunch of logs that are open is why that tree rotted like it did, because of that practice. And I'm glad I'm in northern Indiana where people don't top that often. Because I go to homeowners' properties and they're saying they're having issues with the tree and they've been topping them for years. And I'm thinking in my mind, you killed your trees. But I'll make it sound better and just saying some rot set in and they're going, but I would recommend not to top your trees in the future.
So would you recommend anything to fill that hole in, or is there anything you can do? Because you said that that's a good place where.
I would be checking that tree. I mean, arborists, well, actually, if they think that the wood could be soft, you can drill in and with a small drill, we're not creating a large opening and see if you're hitting a soft area to know if the rot is occurring inside of that tree. If that's occurring in this tree, then it probably needs to come down before it comes down on top of the house. But, you know, the idea is to make the water shed so it's not going into the tree. So if you cover that with something that sheds the water, you can do that.
Like what? Would it be something you paint on there or a? piece
No,
of
it'd be like a
plastic?
piece of metal or just something attached that sheds the water, plastic that's attached, that's not gonna hurt the tree how you attach it. But you just want the water shedding off of that opening so it's not going in there.
None of the squirrels can go in behind it and have a little dig.
Well, you can make an opening for the squirrels, but you know, so it just has to be something that diverts the water so it's not filling that up that opening. So it's something I would, with my house that I just bought, I'd be checking into that tree before I bought the house to see if it really needs to come down. So I wouldn't have to have that expense after purchasing the house. As homeowners, we love our trees. I do too. But we also have to realize that at some point, some need to come down for safety issues. So that's one thing we need to be checking for if we have openings like that in our tree and make sure the tree is still solid.
And along that line, if you want to plant a tree, don't plant it too close to a place where its growth could impact and bring damage at an unusual time.
Correct. I mean, if you went back to that house, they're too close to the house for that size
It
of a
looked like
tree.
it.
I mean, because you want to have its normal, that's why when you plant a tree, you got to know how big it's going to get. Because you want to plant it so where the branches aren't going to be touching your roof, because then you're inviting squirrels to find openings to get into your house. It's also not good for your roof, you know, and my son cost him $3,000. Good thing he's an electrical engineer. 3,000 or 3,300 in Bloomington because there was a sugar maple that was growing too close to his house. And it grew up through all the electrical lines too. So first of all, people didn't want to take it down. You know, he had to find someone willing to take it down, and then they're not going to give him a good deal to take it down. So luckily he could afford it. He complained about it though, because I raised him to be not tight with his money, just like me. So, and then we need to remember that we don't have things growing over, we shouldn't have things growing over the sidewalks based upon, we should have our bed widths so that when we plant stuff, it stays off the sidewalks and we're not creating barriers, because this should be more in, you know, up closer to the house or in your private space, not right where everyone has to walk by if it's growing over to where they're gonna hit their heads on it and stuff. So that's not being necessarily a good neighbor, even though they're trying to make it pretty. And, you know, old plants like that are annuals, they're gonna be ugly at some point, you know, so it's not the best location of an attractive plant. That is for a while. My wife is a huge fan of sunflowers, so she likes planting sunflowers, but this isn't the place to plant them, in my opinion. Maybe the neighbors rave because the birds come and feed on the seed and they get free sunflower seed. So the neighborhood agrees, that's fine, but it's not something you should, that I would recommend to do based upon landscaping principles. Public spaces should be simple and not intrusive, not making it difficult for people to use the public sidewalk, because that's for the public to use. This is the one I love. Good job. Christina went around and took some pictures for me. This is a great one. You know, this is a whimsical thing to do, and whimsical usually belongs in your private space because you can enjoy it, but people don't get annoyed by walking by pink pigs every day. But she may be known as the pig lady, you know? I mean, some things we do in our public space gets us nicknames. So maybe she has a desire to be known the pink pig lady, and that's why she has them in her public space. But it's a whimsical thing, and traditionally we think this goes in our private space, but this person likes her pigs, and that's her choice. You know, so again, this rock mulch is a tying element for this landscape, keeping it simple and to me attractive for the public space. And with some flowers planted in it to give it beauty. Now, if that's a base of a trunk there, was that right, Christina? Is this around the base of a
It
trunk?
is a trunk.
I'll be pulling
It's
those
a
rocks
public
back.
park, Bob. You probably should tell them what's up.
They don't listen to me, but I would be pulling the rocks away from the base of the trunk. You know, I just don't want direct connection to the trunk because we forget to check. So if we have just a little space between the rocks and the trunk and maintain that, we would, it'd be good for the tree's health long term. Because we just don't know when some rocks are going to literally potentially lock together, and I've seen it multiple times where that was occurring, and the shape of the rock was embedded into the side of the tree, so we knew it wasn't moving the rock. The rock was going into the tree. So there's nothing wrong with, I'm not against rock mulches. It's just that we want to make sure they're not a physical barrier because they can be when they lock. And this is just showing again the principle of using mulches to be the unifying element within beds. So we don't have to have beds covered with plants. We can utilize natural mulches, wood mulches, various kinds, or rock mulches to be the unifying element. What would you do? I didn't like the look of these hostas together. Do you like these? We need something else to just spruce that up more, or is that fine?
I think they're backwards. I think the shortest hosta is in that back corner.
Versus being on the edge where the taller plant should be in the back, the shorter one should be in the front. So we can get that depth created by that difference in height. Over here, we got some plants that are hardy, killing them. You know, we got good plants here. I guess that's not what I thought it was, but we have good plants here that's going to give you a different color during the season, so that's good. So we would like a landscape that has something that we get excited about through the seasons. So this one will do a better job of that. Hostas, we plant them for the foliage. So that's the reason why they're there. And then, you know, of course, as they go back and die back in the fall of the year, we want to clean all that off because there can be pests living actually in the leaves of the hosta plants that we don't want to be there for the next spring when they pop back up out of there.
What do you mean? Cut them back, cut them down? cut the whole-
Yeah, as they die back. They're not going to stay green, but we don't need to do it till they die back. But when they die back, we want to clean up our beds to get a pest that may be living within the leaf out of that area as they die back, so they're not there waiting next spring to infest the new regrow.
There is a school of thought where you keep some plant material, so insects actually have habitat for the winter.
If it's healthy plant material, that's fine.
But, you know, like spiders and little hollow stems and things like that.
Thank you.
And in the one that's wood mulch on the left,
Mhm.
it's sort of like, what else? Well, we see on the right those big boulders. Maybe throw a big boulder into the mulch to
Add some
grow more
interest.
plant material.
Mhm.
But I would probably argue that if you call the mulch uniformity, and to me, the mulch is not really something you should be seen. I'm more into more plants, but appropriately done. So I might argue that.
And that's fine.
So I have a green landscape and I'm just not looking at brown mulch that looks to me like a dirty diaper. Okay,
And that's fine. And so you want to select your plants that you can do more planting with. That's not going to, depending on your time, be higher maintenance. So that's where you got to balance out maintenance,
you have
and
to figure that out.
you've got to figure your time that you have and landscape appropriately. That's why for that one person with that grass mulch and stuff, that was just grass plantings in that house. That's why I kind of liked it, because that's going to be easy for them to maintain. And if they're working 2 jobs or having a crazy lifestyle, having a simple landscape you can
It's
maintain.
cut once a year and that's it.
You've got something that's easy to do. And then that other house obviously doesn't have time to maintain their landscape, so they need another solution. I mean, because when things get out of control like that, obviously they don't have the time or the energy to
For
take,
the desire.
or the
Yeah.
desire.
Yeah.
My gosh,
Or the
have
kids
nothing
sleep.
versus that. And then, again, you can, so then we have a nice simple planting here that they can maintain if they do regular pruning of the evergreens. So that we don't want them to get big. We want to maintain their size. So we're going to be sizing them down annually to keep more of that size. But we can rest assured he's not too crazy because he's not maintaining a steady shape. He's allowing natural to grow after he downsizes the growth each year.
It does look like a dwarf evergreen, which is very short growth every year. So you can go many years and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, it's gotten big.
So that's my only concerns with evergreens. You got to remember to maintain the size. Even if it's growing slowly, you want to keep it the
Keep your eye on
scale.
it.
You want to keep the scale. So big part of landscape is scale. So this is not overpowering. They spend a lot of money to have this rock on the side of their house. So they're keeping that visible. That's good for my brother-in-law. He's in that business. So, and then what happened here? I'm looking there, I'm just not seeing, so we're having a border planting, what was a rock mulch is just not being maintained at this point.
This is water drip line, by the way.
The soaker hose.
No, it's copper drip for irrigation.
Yeah.
Just came out of the dirt. Like
So-
water, just washed it.
Pretty sad.
We have a lot of landscapers that'll come in and give people a beautiful landscape, but they have to help maintain it after it's installed. And that may be what's happening here. They're not doing a good job of maintaining it, or maybe they designed it themselves.
We don't know what it's meant to be growing in.
I don't- Right. And maybe they just didn't maintain the mulch that was allowing it to be more attractive. So in private areas, this is kind of, this is where we tend to have more hard landscape like patios, benches, raised beds even that are made to be above the ground and with structures. That's where we find, why do I say ponds and streams? I've got examples of those that you can create those in your backyard, in your private space if you want one. It's not real complicated. There's businesses that'll do that for you. We need that play area that would tend to be in the private space. If we're going to have fruit trees, small fruits and vegetables, they tend to be more fitted for the backyard as they drop fruit or the vegetables get ugly this time of the year and diseased and everything else. So that it's no longer an attractive place. Perennial landscapes could be anywhere. Their rules was it may fit better in the private space, but a nice perennial bed in the front can work as long as it's not overpowering the open field to the front yard landscape. Theme gardens are fun things. And for homeowners, that tends to be more in the backyard space to where you can celebrate your uniqueness more. And then edible landscapes can be incorporated through private spaces is where they would tend to be think to be, or they could be incorporated into the public space as well, as long as it's done attractive and maintained and attractive. So we can do that with containers in the front public space if you want to grow some tomatoes or have a few plants out front. Well, I often think you could plant some asparagus and just let the ferns be part of your landscape and harvest the vegetable, the stem tissue in the spring of the year. So rhubarb, there's no reason why it's not an ugly plant. My rhubarb still looks fairly nice right now. You just can't over harvest it, but that's something that can be incorporating landscape. So there's many things we can do in our private space, and some of this can even be moved if it's done properly to the public space. I didn't show the house. I drove by a house. I took a picture quick, just thinking, well, I could use that. Then I didn't do it. They just, everything in the front of the house was everything you could imagine, just kind of like laying out in front. So that if you're going to have it just sprawling out, that should be in your private space, not your public space, when you're wanting people to stop by and say hi to you. Stepping over bicycles or a weed eater laying out there and that kind of stuff. That's shouldn't be in their public space. But why show that picture? It's not a good picture, so I didn't.
As far as edible goes, I've had good luck growing June-bearing strawberries as a ground cover.
Correct.
It just is really nice, and then you get some fruit.
Yeah,
Sometimes you have to pull out some old plants and send runners. You have to control it and everywhere, but it's pretty nice.
that's pretty cool. And even day neutral, they'll give you a little
That's
fruit
right. That's
in the spring and the fall. So you have something, I call my edible landscape, my snack area outside. So I can go get a peach, a pear right now, and had a couple of peaches this year, not as many as I wanted, and apples are prevalent this year. So, but then I've got the strawberries that actually I had them in containers and they overwintered 2 years without any protection. Can't be again this winter because I can't believe we're gonna have 3 mild winters in a row. We're not that lucky.
Bite your tongue.
By my tongue.
I like hard winters.
Hey, I lived up here in the late 70s and early 80s, and we knew what winter was back then because it came in November and it didn't leave until late spring or mid-spring. We had snow for 5 months, and I worked at Purdue University, and I had to walk to my sheep unit from the house that they gave me to live in. And it was minus 72 degrees below zero with wind chill factor. And luckily, my car wouldn't start at home because it was outside, but at work, the work truck was inside. So at least I had something to drive around and it was warm and I was doing that. Chores for the sheep. I kind of felt sorry for the sheep. That's pretty cool. So then these private areas can be created. Again, this is a quarter lot and they're using vegetation and fencing to create behind their house a more of a private area without this blockage. People walking on the sidewalk could see the behind their house, the side of the house, and the front of the house, and they virtually have no outdoor private space. So they create it with a fence, which takes up less space than growing a hedge or using shrubs to do that. So you just need some width that you can afford to give away to do plantings to give you that privacy. And a fence is an option that can fit in most landscapes to give you private space. So we can create that private space so we can have some relaxing areas where the people can't look and see us. Sometimes we just aren't in the mood to talk to neighbors. So it's nice to have some private space. And then you can do what you want. It depends on your acreage, where you live in town or outside. But this is not a natural stream. This is man-made. So it just recirculates water with a pump to give you that sound and feel of having a little brook in your landscape. So if you like the calming noise of water, this is something we can add as an element to our landscapes. Or we can just make you feel like this is a wild area. This is Cliff Berger's property. He took over 3 acres from his dad, which was just a cornfield, and created this habitat of tamarack trees, rhododendrons, and different, even some native magnolia trees and different plantings like that. And you'd think this has been here for centuries after he got it established. Again, water elements will tend to fit better in a private space versus a public space for many reasons. We don't really want neighbors playing in our private ponds and water features from a safety factor, but they can really be powerful and a tranquil element in our landscapes if we have the space to put them in. So this is, again, something else we can do in a private space, but then you have to maintain them. So doing a landscape checkup on these is maintaining, making sure they're holding the water and being maintained. My father went crazy on this concept in his backyard in Napanee, and he enjoyed it. His only trouble is he had koi fish in his pond, and his issue was birds coming in eating, harvesting his fish. So he was feeding the wildlife out of his pond. He didn't think that was understanding. This is kind of just a thing about garden spaces and vegetable areas and until they get established and growing. This is the Hole in the Woods farm, so I just threw that in for the fun of it. That's to give the idea. That's why this needs to be in the private area. It's not whether tomato plants are get a disease, it's just a matter of when. So we know they're going to look ugly at some point. And how we prevent this is these leaves all should be picked off that are discolored, because once a leaf is diseased, it's dead, it just doesn't know it yet. So you need to harvest it. And that almost looks like a hornworm there. So they're not doing a good job maintaining their vegetables.
Wow, don't you treasurize my tomatoes. That's in my house.
We're feeding the wildlife.
Yeah, that's what mine looks like right now.
Yeah, I trimmed mine. I'm done with them. So Bob, so you know that yes, these are all now gone.
But that's why this is in private space usually.
Yes.
You know, so if we're gonna grow a tomato plant in our public space in a container, we just need to do maintenance on it, and once it looks ugly, remove it, because that we don't want an ugly plant by our front door. You know, but we can use that space to grow some plants like that. This is fun. You know, so we can do whimsical things in our backyard. We can, you know, this could be some poles we set. We plant pole beans on it, let them grow up from different angles or have strings, and you create a teepee out of plant tissue for your grandchildren to play in or your children. And then when they're out there playing, tell them to pick the beans too. But we can do fun things, and that's more reserved for the private area. So, you know, when you're thinking of your own landscape, is there anything you can add as an element that may be fun to do, you know, that will add some enjoyment to you or to your family? So as we're thinking through our landscapes, is there some fun features we can add to it?
It's a fun focal point.
Yes, yes. It really is. And
That's right next to my yard.
yeah. So this is a great wild plant, you know, natural planting of native flowering plants for helping with pollinators and what have you. And actually having wild areas in a section of your yard will attract in beneficial insects that can help with your garden plants, and maybe they'll get that hornworm before they feed on your tomato plants. So having a native area that is good for pollinators is something we can add to landscapes, and it also will attract in some beneficial insects that can help with other plantings that we have in that area. And they can be quite attractive, but they're going to be seasonal in their appearance. So that could be another reason why it fit better in a private area versus your public area, which we want to keep attractive. Again, having this massive planting of perennial flowers in this wild area, and this is in their front yard, so then that's going to take maintenance on. No, that's their backyard, right?
It's at alley side. It's toward the alley,
That's where it belongs. They planted it in the right spot. Good for them.
but it looks like they needed to water it maybe a little more. It was pretty dry.
But that's why they're saying that perennial beds may not fit the best in a public space because they have to be maintained to be there. So you got to work hard to maintain the plant.
Not perennials, we were supposed to put them in and forget them.
Well, I wish it was that simple.
That's maybe why this sounds black like Cindy's.
I know, see, kindred spirits, I feel it. Yeah.
You just gotta help them along to get established. I mean, we've seen highway plantings all right here in Marshall County that have been very effective once they got established. And they were pretty taking over the whole area and look attractive in periods of the growing season. So they can do that eventually, but you gotta make sure that invasives and unwanted plants aren't filtering into that planting until they get off. Yeah, it'll take a few years. I mean, just to be watching out for. We have this crazy thing, and I'll show you pictures of it, probably the third session, called Oriental Bittersweet. And actually, when it germinates and starts growing, it looks like something that's attractive, but it is a nasty weed. You know, so stuff like that, we want to make sure it doesn't get going in our perennial bed. So we want, you know, when people bring me plants they find in their yard to identify, my thought is, I would never be that lucky. That'd be like me winning the Powerball, to actually have just a random plant start growing in my yard. That's gonna be a positive plant. But, you know, they did the right thing by bringing it to me. But you want to get it identified and make sure it is not going to hurt the landscape. Because I always say the easiest time to control a weed in your landscape is when you can do this. You know, and usually when people contact me about a weed issue, it's not that simple. So, so this is just, again, a private space where there's a fence dividing it. You can see they're having a tent, a carport to park in that private space, and they're using that to store some stuff. And not being a closed-in garage is probably at the right location versus being in the public space. It's not that we had the division of the two properties. We have a fence so that we have more privacy from the roadside to this private space. So just developing a nice area to where you can have that privacy, and maybe be a little bit unkept if you are of that nature. Keep that in your private space. So these, again, I already mentioned this, so we can just go on to the next one. That's in the alley. That was actually in the right space. Those were, if you notice, those are the alley side. So, okay, a whimsical place like this is at Wellfield Gardens in the north part of Elkhart County. But there's no reason why you can't do this. Is make a pergola, have your grapes growing over them to give shade to it. And then in this area, it's a play area for kids to play in. So you can do something fun like that in your private space, you know, to take advantage of that. I knew this one gentleman just into Stark County, his back porch, he had grapes growing over it. So it had that natural cooling effect, because as the grapes evaporate that water, that cools that space. So it's not just shade. So it's almost like an air conditioned area where he could hang out with. And then he was harvesting the grapes off of the plants growing over that's giving him a shade in that nice little relaxing area. So it's a neat concept that maybe when I retire from extension, I'll have time to actually do myself. And this I love. I mean, this is right just a few blocks away from us. And it's just the private space where we have these chairs underneath this nice shade tree. And I know the gentleman that owns that house. I'm sure they've discussed the world's problems many a time there with their favorite beverage, relaxing. So having this space in our landscape is important. The only issue was this beech tree had some issues. It was somewhat hollow inside of the tree. Probably outlived me many a year, but that was one issue that that's why I was asked to come to this to check out that tree. And this is just a nice, could be in anyone's backyard. It's a nice area where you can have a couple benches, a nice attractive landscape around them, utilizing even some container garden with it, where we can relax in our own yards. And that could be in the public space. That bench could be probably not a big area devoted to hanging out together in your public space. So this would fit better in the private space. So the service areas, just we want to just think about as where your utility lines coming in. You have a utility post, or what do you do in your garbage cans after you bring them back from the street, and all those things shouldn't be that visible to the general public. It should be in our private space, and ideally not something we have to look at on a regular basis. So, you know, we can make it so it's just not obvious. Use landscape to direct from them. Help them in a private area so they're not visible. We can have, you know, in our garages or in storage sheds, or use a storage shed maybe to block the visibility of them. We want easier access. Or we can decorate them, you know, like rain barrels we paint now to make them a part of our landscape. And it's a really cool idea is to capture rain from your roof so that you can utilize it because it's not going to have any salts in it. It's going to be utilized to supplement your watering needs outside. So it's a great idea. I know there's some controversy over using it on some plants because it may be bringing down some debris off the roof. But there's, I'm sure there's a lot of perennial plants and stuff that we can utilize it with. Or at least let it go someplace where it's going to soak into your yard. One issue we have now is we're getting more rainfall annually due to the climate change that has occurred. And we just need to let more water soak into our yards instead of going through the public drain system. Because my idea would be to design landscapes now to where all of our water that's coming off our roofs and stuff just soaks into our landscape someplace. I'll give you a solution on the third night on what we could do to allow that
I'm
to happen.
not gonna be able to hear the third night. So are you taking this? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so then that's not too unattractive, right? Does that bother you?
I feel like the blue.
So they're blue. We could actually do a mural across them to blend in with something or make a statement. But that's just an example, but it's in their private area. It's not in their public space.
Well, even if it's in the public space, it's, I don't know what the right word is, but it's in effect maintained. It's just 3 barrels sitting there. It's not like they're throwing junk all over everywhere.
No, it depends
Clean
on
lines.
what subdivision you live in if you can get away with that.
Oh, that's why I don't live in subdivisions. Homeowner rules for me.
No, that's not too attractive. He's burning his own wood to heat his house. So he's using fence to kind of give that privacy, so that the neighbors aren't seeing the actual unit. The smokestack, I doubt if he can do much with that because it's going to be hot when he's using it. Pools, that should be in a private space. It should be obviously fenced. This one is not. And they kind of let their landscape get a little bit away from them. Would you agree? Or not?
It's hard to tell, not necessarily.
I think maybe behind the fence, maybe. That might be starting to encroach and probably putting a lot of leaves inside of that pool.
Oh, that's an idea.
We certainly have a very wide walkway from the house down to the pool, so a little of a tree limb or arm hanging over isn't too problematic. Softens things.
Yeah, that's what landscape does. It does soften it. That's what makes it. It takes the hardness off of the hard landscape.
Seeing that fence around the wood burner in the alleyway in the last was just so stark. And this is just more pleasant for sure.
So yeah, we just gotta think where our trash cans go after we take them out to the front to be done. So that's an ongoing issue that we just have to think about, is that it's something that needs to be taken back to a private space. Obviously, it gotta be accessible to go out to be dumped. So I think many of us use our garages or something like that. This is hiding a clothesline that they were talking about, but this is a good example of a plant that's out of control. This was supposed to make you laugh.
It's like a
It's
bird
doing
plant
a
that they
great
just let it
job.
grow.
Doing a great job hiding
It is.
it. What is it?
My mind just went. It's a Rose of Sharon.
Oh,
Hey, what?
Rose of Sharon.
Rose of Sharon, okay. Hard to tell.
So then what would you advise that if it was like,
Downsize it. You can print it back. Over
Okay.
time. You can regenerate plants. So it's a printing issue, is what it is. But you just don't want to print out the buds before they bloom, because that's why you have a Rose of Sharon to have that flash of color. So we'll talk about printing some next week. There. beautiful, what do you look at? The utility posts or those beautiful flowers? What catches your eye? So that's how landscapes can be, just take your eye off of the ugly element that just happens to be placed in your landscape. We need the utilities, but that's a fun way to make fun of, have that not be the focal point, that you'll really see that color. So go to the next one. I'm just going to talk about, so, oh, that got big. I had another picture here. But here we're using ground cover to be the unifying element. So if you prefer plants to be it, that's something you can do.
So there we go. We don't see the mulch there. That's what I like.
So yeah, so we have different kinds of plants we can use to do that. It could be strawberries. It could be multiple different kinds of plants. And then
Does
you-
that keep the weeds down? I mean, is the ground cover like that?
Yeah.
better to-
yeah, it'll help with that. Yeah, so that's, you just don't want to, I have Archangel as my ground cover on one spot, and it's a invasive plant, so it doesn't stay put. You know,
I grow
there's-
my archangel under a river birch tree where it has a lot of root competition that isn't quite so vigorous.
okay, but it's beautiful in the spring with the yellow bloom.
Yes.
So it's a very attractive ground.
And the
cover.
mottled leaf looks really good against the exfoliating bark of the birch tree.
Oh,
They go
yeah,
nicely together.
great. So, but if you have it, you just got, if you have a ground cover that tends to be a little aggressive, you just gotta be watching out for it and not letting it spread to areas you don't want it.
Cause isn't strawberries, is that kind of aggressive? I
Well,
think
they
that
send out
can
runners
people-
and they get going, so you have to rip those off, or some of the older strawberry plants are need to be removed and a fresh, younger runner for
Yeah.
them. So you know, keep some food production.
So why do you even do that in the first place? It looks like it's more trouble.
Well, it depends on the ground cover you select, but it's to have a unifying element that you don't have.
What are
to
you referring to that looks like trouble there? What do you mean?
Taking care of it. There's the bushes, and that's easy to trim, and then there's the grass, and that's easy to mow. So that would be my choice.
Well, that's why we all have, so it's not, I got in trouble as a graduate student because I element of my research a subjective value to it. But this is subjective. There's no right answer. It's what you prefer. And because I had to do a body condition score in the sheep in my research project, and they love to do that to master graduate students when they're defending their thesis. They just want to put you under that stress so you learn how to be a public presenter. So they're doing it for the right reason, but sometimes I think they get too much joy out of it.
So it looks like Mickey Mouse's ear. When I first looked at that, that's what I
And
see.
who doesn't like Mickey Mouse? Come on.
I mean, from the look of the super clean lines against the sidewalk,
That look nice.
this looks like somebody who loves to work in their yard,
Yeah.
that they take pride in this and
Has
they
lots of money and hasn't done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
retired and they
Yeah.
want to take some time,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the lines are so
Manicure.
clean, I mean, all around,
Yeah,
and
it's
very
perfect.
aesthetically pleasing, but
And
this
the
would be.
picture was taken right after it was tended.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. Yeah, that's part of maintenance, so you gotta think about that, obviously. Oh, there it is. I don't know, I didn't delete that one, but this is just another, picture where it's got some whimsical in the design of the layout of the bed, so that it has curves that you have to take into account for when you're mowing, but then, okay, that we have a mulch element and plantings that are repetitive throughout this to give unity to this border planting around this backyard. So another way we can, there you go. This is why you like river birches.
The
Yeah.
heritage.
We've got this nice element that's seasonal, which in our landscapes, we want to think more than just summer. We want to think, so this is gonna be pretty in the winter time too. So having plants that have seasonal aspects when we still like to get out on those nice winter days and go for walks. We enjoy our landscape as we're walking through it by having those elements.
They do drop a lot of twigs. You go get your exercise. Come on. Bring you down.
So this picture's in here because right now it's a fairly balanced planting. There's nothing overpowering in this landscape. So it's inviting to me to look at it. So there's different plants, different sizes of plants. So it's giving some interest as we look at it. So what do you guys think about it?
I love it.
Nice
Nice.
light post.
I like.
I like the pumpkins in the back with that color, drawing it
Yeah,
back
yeah.
toward the house.
The trees, you see the root flare, there's not mulch covering those, that's good.
This is very good. This is what trees should look like. You know, we should have some root flare there. I didn't get my picture in. I'll show that another week. Picture of a tree that's planted too deep that had a girdling root. That's what happens when you plant them too deep. You can get a girdling root going around them. It's a root that, because of how they planted the tree, it started some advantageous roots to come out of areas where the roots should be coming out of. And then if you have any structure that it hits, they'll go back towards the tree. And eventually one will settle in, growing right beside the tree. So as it grows in width and the tree trunk grows in width, they grow together. And then that root will start being like that rock I was talking about, restricting the growth of the trunk of the tree.
And strangling, basically.
Wow, I got it. I just never heard that term before.
I mean, Bob, we have about 15 minutes. I didn't know, do you want to see if that one might have?
Oh, yeah, like I said, we're gonna have to get through all the slides tonight. That I got here, we'll just move on, because we're gonna go from talking about this. I have some problems that we can talk about next week. But one thing we gotta remember that in the industry, when we buy a potted plant or even a bulb burlap, that when they put them in the containers, they tend to put them deeper than they were naturally growing to give some protection to the roots, as I think the process is. The industry has found out it can be where the natural root flare is of the plant, can be as deep as 4 inches in some containers of larger plants. So then when you take them out to plant them, you got to replant them at the right level so that we aren't getting girdling roots, that we don't plant that tree too deep. And it can be an issue in the industry when they're taking the bulb and burlaps, because they may not check for that, because they can just size a hole, put them in. But if I bought a bulb and burlap, I pull the structures off the top of it, I pull back the tarp and make sure where the root, how deep to plant it. I wouldn't destroy my ball, because that's what I'm paying all the money for, but I gently do that to determine the depth that I need to plant it in, to have it at the right depth after I planted it. So it's important to do so we plant at the right depth. But if you bought this, the average person that may not have as much knowledge may just think this is the right level to plant it at, where it's right in this container. So then you're planting it too deep. So with this one, see right there, that's just stem tissue. So instead of making a huge mess, it's down there a couple of inches. So when we pull this out of this container, which I will not do because I've already made enough mess, we would replant it, about that much. I mean, that after we remove it, it need to be, it's already planted to that deep too much in this container. So it's already starting getting some advantageous roots coming out of the trunk tissue. So we need to plant it at the right size. So when you pull it out of the container, you'll be able to see that, so be sure to pull them out. You're supposed to pull them out, you gotta pull out the container, plant them. And if it's been in the container too long, you may need to take a knife and loosen up those roots so you don't have roots that are growing in a circle after you plant it into the hole. So you have to check the roots anyways. And even a ball and burlap that's been saved for the next season, that's been in that ball for a long time, I'd want to make sure there's no roots that are growing in that fashion. And after I get it in my hole, I'd be checking that. Landscapers that are doing it for a living, the margins are so tough for them that they may do it a little quicker than I would do as a homeowner if I plant my own ball and burlap. And that's fine, because usually it does work out just fine. So I'm not being negative. It's just that it's my landscape. I'm going to take more time. I'll be more do more investigation. So, you know, on trees like this, you need to see that root flare. If you don't see a root flare, you need to go make sure that the tree is not having some issues. I don't know why I said yes, but I said yes to this gentleman, and maybe I'll film me digging around a girdling root and removing it. As a more seasoned individual that has that issue, and I did it once before, and I said I'd never do it again. But this tree is not growing. It's just a weird situation because it was not planted into a raised bed or had a raised bed created around it. The last one I tried to help the gentleman with, he did that. So he had multiple girdling roots that he created. And Price Nursery told him no. And why I said yes, because I'm sure Price Nursery looked at it and realized it's okay. Because when you pull it back and you have a lot of them, what roots do you cut and what roots don't you do? Because it's going to need some roots to maintain its health. So it becomes a puzzle. This one won't be. It's just one root. Color. Isn't that fabulous color? But if it's right in your face, it may be too much. You know, so it depends on your landscape and where you can place it. So you just want to think how you're going to use color in your landscape so that it's eye-appealing to you. And then again, as we have evergreens that are starting to grow out beyond their space, it's volunteers that maintain this. They need to be tipping them back to keep them in space so we have new growth coming. And we don't let that get too large before we try to reduce the size. Because you can say it's kind of in the walkways, at least the walkways are wide. It's not a problem now, but on this side, it's more of a problem because the walkway is more narrow. If you've never been to Wellfield Gardens, it's worth the trip. It's a fabulous place to go and relax. They have theme gardens throughout, and you can get some good ideas. And we fell in love with Alaskan.
Cedar.
Was it
It was a cedar.
Is a cedar? Because they had drooping limbs.
Yeah.
And Amy Hinkie was excited because it was growing well with some shade, because of shade properties.
Now, where is that?
Just on the north side of Elkhart City. It's easy to find if you don't get lost in Elkhart, which I usually do.
What was the name of the place?
Wellfield Gardens. It's a well field. No, it's actually, it's where they pump their water for the city. So they actually do it, but they allowed debris to accumulate there. So they cleaned it up and they have this huge pond, fountains, and different theme gardens planted around it. And it costs, what, $7 to get in. It's not real expensive. And on a nice day, it's a good place to go visit.
And what was the cedar? Alaskan?
Alaskan cedar.
Alaskan false cypress or
Yeah,
Kobe cypress.
that sounds like it.
Very dramatically hanging vertical.
It's beautiful. It's cool. Oh, just, yeah, observe scale. Oh, we got some neat slides coming up here. Go ahead. So what bothers you with this picture? Does the size of the landscape match the size of the house?
Gonna take a few years.
They're just waiting for it to grow.
It could be, you know, so I don't know the exact planting here, so maybe over time it will fill in. And actually, a professionally done landscape should look a little bigger when it's planted because you gotta allow for the size of the plants to grow. You gotta have the size for the mature plant, not for the baby plant. And the homeowner's mistake, usually they want it to look like a mature landscape the day after they plant it, and there's no room for things to grow. That's why we always want to look at our tags that are on here, because this is going to be 3 to 4 feet high and 3 to 4 feet wide. So we want to give it that much space when we plant it, so we don't have a maintenance nightmare.
And I've heard it said about conifers, that it'll give you those dimensions, and that's what it might be in 10 years, but it will keep growing. It will not stop, so it will really be more than that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's and Is this in the right scale? Is this what we want in our hopefully the person, when he gets done remodeling the house, that's, you can't see behind these are gone.
That's where he's.
It looks
building his
like bodyguards for that trash can.
One time in southern Indiana, I've lost that picture. Someone had this size of a front yard and planted a white pine in their front yard. So eventually that white pine was just going to overpower the house, as it got bigger. So that's why we always want to think about mature size and how it's going to fit in our landscape long term. Because nobody wants to cut down a tree once it's growing and living.
It's a little high.
Privacy, man.
That's
Not
right.
Limited privacy, but
It sounds like a bug fence. There's all sorts of critters back there.
I think.
Well, it's got an aggressive plan. It's got some, so it does have some. The good thing is, if you don't want to get rid of it because it's an invasive plant,
A burning bush?
yes.
Say it looks like a little bit of red in there.
It's got some, it has burning bushes, which I've seen them when people haven't maintained them be as tall as our house, and then our issue is they're starting to get in our woodlands. So some plants we don't like because of our native habitat is being, our SWCD person, Jody Overmeyer, has never seen a ornamental pear she loves. She wants to cut them all down because the birds are taking that fruit and planting it out in the woodlands. And then it's competing with our natural flora.
What's it, SWCD?
Soil and Water Conservation District, their goal is to help maintain our water and our soils, so for future generations. So a very good organization. And she's actually a pretty graduate in horticulture and landscape design, so she should be here teaching this class. So this one, where we are seeing those elements where we're having different heights, and then coming to the corner and getting more height. So that looks like it needs some maintenance to me. The challenge is sometimes we plant a tree by a corner of our house and can overpower it sometimes. So you want to be thinking about selecting what you're going to use as your corner plantings. What size is it going to be over time? So you want to be careful with that selection. Same way, I thought this looked like a nice landscape in front of the house, especially when I drove by it, but it was on 17, so I didn't want to park in front of it because of the traffic. But then I just saw that this tree was starting to overpower that corner. I like the distance this tree's planted away from the house. It's not impacting the house. So overall, I'd give this landscape a pretty good score. It's just maybe someday they're going to have to replace this tree. And it's got a lot of trunks coming up out of it that could be issues down the road too, as it gets
Looks like
bigger
it's
with the
touching the
storm.
roof. Was it on?
yeah.
If it's touching the roof, it needs to be pruned down. It never should touch the roof.
Yeah, it's just overpowering, right?
Yeah, that's why I took the picture. That's the one element in the landscape identified. And it should be addressed. So we don't want that in our landscapes. We want a focus to our landscape. I couldn't figure out the focus in this bed. I just looked at it and not being critical. Well, yeah, I'll give them a break. This was trash can day, so they're not home from work yet. So they haven't got those put away yet out of the public space. That's where they're hanging out now. But this planting had a little bit of everything going in it, and including some invasives. So that's the challenge, is that, we don't take care of our beds. Mother Nature will give us other alternatives to grow in. This, I'm just trying to think, was there any focus at all, or do we like this?
I bet it was nice at one time, or if it was trimmed back. Yeah, I mean, it looks like it has potential.
I don't think it's gonna take too much. I know there's a lot going on, but some of it's just big. I don't think it's gonna take too much to bring that back.
Looks like there's different levels though, that I think, yeah, if you brought that out.
Yeah, it's a layered landscape and the sidewalk is inviting you in there. In my opinion.
Grass
we
looks
like
like
this.
golf course grass. I want to touch that
Good
grass.
grass.
Well, the grass is really good, but yeah, I think it definitely needs to be cleaned out. I like the layer. So professionally, what do you think?
I think if I was a neighbor, I would not be mad about this.
Well, it looks like, is that something growing? Oh, that's a fence. Okay. But then the shrub is growing into the fence. That's why it looks like there's species at the base. So that one, this probably should be maintained. So you can look at elements and some of it just needs pruned back and, or should have been to maintain the attractiveness of the overall landscape. But it's better than looking at some landscapes that I looked at. Including mine. I need to spend 2 weekends on my landscape, so I'm not pointing fingers because you know when you point a finger, more fingers point back at you. And I need to do some maintenance on my landscape too. So it's easy to let things get a little crazy. But this is what's, you know, at least look at these. You can go online and get more detailed information on any plant that you're looking at purchasing. But don't purchase a plant until you know where it needs to go, if it's going to be zone hardy for your situation. There's no sense planting a plant that's going to die. And trust me, at some box stores, they sell plants that are going to die. You know, so that's why you really got to make sure it's hardy to your zone. And you should monitor your own plants once they're in your landscape to see how well that, oh yeah, this is, look what this is attached to. Burning bush, right?
Yes, well, yes, I think it was a dwarf burning bush is what it was.
They're never dwarf.
Well, this one says it was. But I was surprised. I'm like, look at them still selling this.
So when, you know, we always want to select plants that have interest for more than just one season. And this is kind of showing you just the fruit on it. We're getting some color now that we didn't have in the spring of the year, it's all foliage. So you want to just think about it. Is there a place in your landscape you need to add more winter interest or fall interest? And we have a variety of perennial flowers bloom at different periods throughout the growing season. So you can kind of plan your beds on when they're going to have color throughout the season. And that's part of giving interest to the landscape. And then we have fruit that can add color too. So that's pretty cool. And this, a nice, simple little landscape, you know, so it's not something, it's dual plexes. So his line is here and then he doesn't want any shrubs on his side, so he didn't plant them. So it's kind of hard to do elaborate landscape where they're living, but.
Is the mulch too high on the tree?
Yes, yes, that gets an app. That's why I took the pictures, because they did a wrong job of mulching their tree. That is.
Their light poles nicely.
Yeah. Didn't they? Good discussion. The reason why a high mulch is not good, it's not only just it's maintaining moisture, it's giving it access for rodents to get up by the trunk. You know, so rodents, if you ever see a tree in the spring of the year that someone's pulling bark off the bottom of the limbs on the tree, that's squirrels. They're rodents. They got to gnaw on something to keep the teeth from growing into their brain. So if they don't have anything left over that they can gnaw on in the spring of the year, they'll start gnawing on the trees. That's a bad aspect about rodents that they have to do. And I've gotten those calls before, and they were just working on this one tree, pulling off the bark, trying to do it. But other rodents, smaller rodents, can be using it as access to the tree. We'll talk about it. And this is a concept of the evergreen plants. And rhododendrons don't like heavy pruning, so you should make sure that their mature size is accounted for when you plant them. But if we do beds that are for acid-loving plants, help to ease landscape maintenance, we plant acid-loving plants together so they can maintain the acidic nature of that soil for the whole bed. If plants don't need much watering, they should be grouped more together than plants that need watering. You don't want to have a plant that needs more watering than another plant and having them close in the landscape, because how are you going to maintain the moisture? So we need to kind of group plants together so that we can do maintenance with them in a more of a uniform fashion. So I just picked those pictures out. And then we can do hardscapes to make things interesting. This is kind of a cool picture, you know, where they're creating more of a oriental element to their landscape by doing this, so it's a major feature here. So if you have a pond that you want to cross and you want to do some landscaping that ties into this hard landscaping, it's a cool feature to think about to incorporate into your landscapes.
I'm not gonna lie, this looks terrifying. Terrifying.
Looks like a puzzle.
It looks like a puzzle. You gotta go up and down steps and then there's nothing to hold your head. This is terrifying. I've
Yeah, but
never
at
crossed it.
advanced levels, you don't use the board, you just hop from post to post to
I
post.
guess.
Yeah, I'll do it if you.
Send
do
my
it.
toddler over. He'll be just fine.
Oh my goodness.
That's
Oh,
terrifying.
He's so cute, but he'd do it too.
Well, it's 7:30, so
Oh.
we can wind it down now, I guess. Unless you want to buzz through some plant problems, but we can save that for next week.
Yeah, let's do that for next week, because I don't want us to buzz